there you go. Couple of little things to do. Tube stripes. Got to put some blue tube stripes down the back here and on this side as well. And then this will be done, and this will be sitting in the collection. There you go, Enoch and his troopers. So say there's a couple of there's a lot of variations within this helmet, all based on the Stormtrooper helmet, but in different colour variations. This one I've gone quite heavy on the gold because I want it to look as though it belongs to Enoch. So we've got a quite heavy bit of gold on this helmet. To say, tube stripes still to go on. It's had process. Let's tell you the process. It came in, I think it was 10 pieces, 3 for the top, and then there was the eyes, the nose, that's 4, and then 4 parts on the side parts, so that's 8, and then 2 parts on the back, that's 10. So this model was actually split into 10 individual parts. I showed some of the way that I put it together. I put a lot of it together off a camera and showed you the individual parts that I'd put together. All these parts have now been put together as one. On the inside of the helmet, they were all solder welded, so a plastic weld. So I was heating up the plastic, heating up the plastic with an old soldering iron and welding it all together. But the gap that I had created, I was then applying more plastic into those gaps to create a solid plastic weld. After that, it was then fiberglass resin. So I'd mix up a fiberglass resin with the hardener and mix that all together, and then I would just literally paint that on the inside of the helmet, let that go off, and it would give me a fiberglass resin with inside the helmet, which made the helmet a little bit heavier, but also made the helmet a lot stronger. After that was done, I think it had 1, 2, 3 coats of filler primer, which was the yellow primer, which is a primer, it's a paint primer with filler within the paint. So as it is extruded from or sprayed out of the can, it was sprayed out as a liquid, but then it would go hard to make a filler. Once that went completely hard, I would then sand that back until I had one uniform colour, which would have been a yellow uniform colour. Still a little bit hard to see any imperfections within the model at this point. I would then, after that, go in with a grey primer. The grey primer, because it's a grey or darker colour, would show up any imperfections within the paint job. I would then sand from the grey back down to the filler primer again, and that would show me any low spots. Anything that stayed yellow would then need a little bit of filler, like car body filler, put into these areas. It would then be grey primered again, and it would then be grey primered again. So we've got 2 coats of grey primer. Then I would wet sand back, probably from around about 600 grit sandpaper, wet sanded back to the yellow come grey. So anything that stayed grey was good, or anything that was yellow would be a low spot, which would then be fillered again until we have a uniform pattern across the top of the helmet or around the helmet. You can see, as I said earlier, we had layer lines, certain layer lines within the model. They're now all gone. I said we wouldn't have any problems with those because they would disappear within the layers of paint that are going to be going on this model. So to get to this point, we've had 3 coats of filler primer, which is the yellow primer, and it would have been sanded in between primer coats back to a yellow coat. It's then had 2 grey primer coats put on top of that, which is your finish primer. After that, it would have had it's had 2 coats of white matte paint. After the second coat of matte paint, it was then wet sanded to give me a uniform canvas to work on. Once I was happy with that, if it needed a little bit more, I would have adjusted what I was doing, either little bit of filler primer or a little bit more white paint on top of that, just to build some layers up. Eventually it would have had a complete wet sand from 600 grit right up to 1500 grit, so it would have given me a good base or good canvas to then apply my final paint onto. Once that was all sanded back, we was a little bit sporadic. We had whites and yellows and maybe a bit of grey shining through. It would have then had the final wet, well, it would have had 2 coats actually. It had a mist coat of white, and then it would have had a wet coat of white, and that would have been the final colour. So the whole helmet would have been white, and you've seen that in some of the footage that I put back up. Once the white was done, it then would have been left for, I think I left it for 24 hours to fully cure. Even though this paint dries within 25 to 30 minutes, I thought I'd give it a proper good cure, because it's been quite cold out in the workshop here. So we give it a good cure of paint for probably about 24 hours before I even touched it again. Once that was all dry, I went in with the detailing, which was all the grey areas, which was the nose area and the side cheek, which I added in here. And obviously these areas were then all grey hand painted in, and around the back as well. So these areas here would have been all hand painted in grey. Once that was done, I then went through and did my weathering, which was with a burnt umber and a black acrylic wash. So that would have been sort of a milky consistency wash, probably less than milky, so it would have been a little bit thinner than milk. That all goes over the top of the white. So at this point you've got a nice white helmet, and it looks really pucker, looks really cool, and now you're putting all this black paint over it, and now the whole thing looks black. Once that is done, you then go back across with a bit of kitchen roll or toilet paper or some absorbent paper, just to take some of the blackness off, and it kind of brings it back in. It gives it a washed out look. So we then had that washed out look, and I was quite happy with that. I was like, yeah, my weathering's good, so I want to seal that in now, because I know that when I put this gold paint on, if I seal it after the gold paint, the gold will then go to a really sort of orangey, dark orangey, horrible kind of paint. So I sealed everything then with a matte lacquer. So anything I put on top of that now, if it goes wrong and I have to sand it back, I'm only going to be sanding back to the matte lacquer and not taking off any of the weathering underneath. So that's where we was at. So once all that was done, I then went in with a hand painted gold, which I'll show you the paint now that I purchased for this. It's a liquid metal paint. So it's a liquid gold paint. Believe it or not, this came through probably about a week and a half ago when I did Enoch, brand new. I think it cost me about £14-15 for this this little, and it is a little tiny little bottle, and most of it ended up over the desk, over my mouse mat, over the desk. I inadvertently tipped it over, and yeah, it went everywhere. Fortunately, I bought two bottles of it, to be honest. One being a liquid gold. They're 2 different colours. I don't know really much of the variation, but one is a 792 and the other one is a 791. So yeah, I had 2 pots of this, and it went down really well. So it had all been clear coated. Then I went in with a gold coat. I was going to do a gold leaf on top of it, but after doing the gold leaf on Enoch, which is the other helmet which I have upstairs, it was coming out, it came out really light. I think really I needed probably 24 karat gold leaf or something like that to really darken it down. So I was happy with the paint job that I'd done, and I thought I'd stick with this paint job, and I carried the paint job over onto this model here. So this is where we're at.